Well, today is tax day. Of course, for Democrats, every day is tax day, but this is the point in time when people across this country have to get their tax returns in. So it's not, in most cases, a very popular day for the American taxpayer. And the Democrats, of course, in their budget this year proposed increasing taxes almost another $5 trillion, $4.7 trillion in new taxes, and that's on top of the $318 billion in taxes that were included just in legislation that they passed last year. So this is all part of what happens when Democrats control government in Washington. They raise taxes, they increase spending, and they grow government. That's the very simple formula. And one of the ways that they try and do that is to increase funding for the IRS. So the so-called Inflation Reduction Act included $80 billion in new IRS funding to hire an additional 87,000 employees. In 2025, there will be 105,000 employees at the IRS, a 45% increase over this year. New IRS employees. That's more than five times the number of border agents we have policing the southern border. And what's remarkable about all that isn't that they are trying to improve taxpayer services, which desperately need to be improved because, as everybody knows, in the last 2 years of the number of calls that went into the IRS, I think in 21, 11% got answered, and in 2022, got up to 13% of those calls actually got answered, and that's literally hundreds of millions of calls into the IRS not responded to. So what do the Democrats do when they increase all this funding for the IRS and all these new employees? They shove them into enforcement instead of taxpayer services. Today, the ratio of people who are involved in enforcement at the IRS to those who are actually responding to taxpayer services is 2 to 1, 2 enforcement for 1 taxpayer services. Under this new legislation that has passed, and as I said, the 105,000 employees they'll have in 2025, that ratio goes to 14 enforcement employees for every 1 included in taxpayer services. This is something that Danny Werfel, the Commissioner of the IRS, is going to get questioned about tomorrow in front of the Senate Finance Committee. But I think on behalf of the American people, it's up to us to try and hold this agency accountable and realize that in the end it's the American people who are paying the price for all this, and what they're going to get caught up in is a lot more audits and a lot less service.
Well, Joe Biden is trying to force-feed American drivers expensive electrical vehicles that they don't need, they don't want, and they can't afford. Joe Biden is trying to put the federal government in the driver's seat as people make decisions on something that is a very personal decision and an expensive decision in terms of what they purchase. And the bad news about these regulations, these come on top of the crushing inflation that so many people in this country are currently living under. So Joe Biden first came after our gas stoves, and now he's decided that by 2023, 2/3 of all the vehicles sold in the United States need to be electric vehicles. I would say to the President, in spite of the mandates, in spite of the very hefty subsidies, people still don't want and cannot afford these expensive electric vehicles, and additional subsidies isn't the answer. On average, electric vehicles last month in this country cost $62,000. That's $16,000 more than the cost of traditional vehicles. Well, expensive electric vehicles may work well for people in big cities who don't drive very far, but if you live in rural America, you're in Wyoming, you're a farmer, you're a rancher, for families all across the country, they want vehicles that are affordable and reliable, and electric vehicles are neither. The batteries themselves are extremely expensive, they're unreliable, they don't have much range, and they take a long time to recharge. So who's the big winner in Joe Biden's policy here? The big winner is China, because they're the ones that sell us the batteries. I would expect in the future the batteries to come with a Made in China label, because that's where the batteries are made. And the reason is that China has cornered the world market on the minerals that are needed to create those batteries. They've done so. And so once again, Joe Biden is selling out America to China. And the reason I say this is even his own White House has said China will be big players in the president's energy agenda. Big players. Well, these big players of China right now are getting richer off of us, getting stronger off of us, as we, through our energy policies, are getting weaker and poorer. So we know why we have this energy policy, because Joe Biden has surrendered America's energy policy to the climate extremists. And with it goes our wealth and our national security. When these regulations come out, I am going to make sure that every senator in this chamber is put on record having to vote on where they stand for this reckless policy. On Thursday, the Secretary of Energy will be with us in front of the Energy Committee, and I'm going to have her answer questions regarding why they continue down this treacherous path while all the warning signs are flashing.
We've had a really cold winter and a lot of snowpack, and we're grateful for it. It was about time we had it. But I would tell you, the Biden administration has not learned anything about what's happened in Europe as it relates to a green hallucination. We are following, because of Joe Biden's leadership as a nation, taking us off the green cliff. The Biden administration seeks to overhaul this economy to fit its green dream. But I've said this back home, and I'll say it here. As you think about the future of energy in our economy, you can't burn today's bridge until you build and validate the future bridges. Democrats want to tear down and eliminate conventional sources of energy when renewables are not yet ready for prime time. This administration started off by killing the Keystone XL pipeline. That comes right into Montana, 1 million barrels a day from our friends in Canada, banning gas stoves while inflation rages. And now, maybe they made this announcement when we were out of town, but Montanans are shaking their heads. What are they thinking about to mandate that 2/3 of our new vehicles have to be electric by 2032? In Montana, we haul crops, we haul cattle, we haul them long distance. We need reliability. As I mentioned, these batteries don't work that well when it gets real cold, and it'll be snowing tomorrow in Montana, and we're getting into the back half of April. By the way, in Montana, we have 85 charging stations. That is one for every 1,700 square miles. States out in the West, big states like Montana, like Wyoming, cannot make anything that Biden's proposing work. Instead of forcing the heavy hand of government to execute their green hallucination, I would highly urge and greatly urge President Biden and the Senate Democrats to let the free market decide what should be successful and what we do in the future in terms of powering our vehicles.